The Old School is brought to you by Ahart Solutions, which provides school surveys and applied research. More information at ahartsolutions.com. Good morning and welcome to the Old School, a now weekly podcast about a whole host of things, not least to which the American education system, as well as sundry of other topics. Today, we stay within our bailiwick. We stay within the notions and the environs of education. And with me in that endeavor is Dr. Stephen Bourgeois.
Herr Miller.
Morning, Dr. Bourgeois.
Oh, I jumped right on your line. It's good to see you, Herr Miller.
All right. How you doing?
I'm fine. It's surprising that we don't jump on each other's lines more often, you know? I don't know why that is, but we seem to have a sense of not speaking when the other person is. Have you noticed that?
I think we've gotten better at it. I think if you listen to like the first 90 some odd podcasts, I think at various times we were not as good as we think we are. But I
Oh,
think in general, we have tried to exhibit a little bit more patience with the pause, allowing for, dare I say, a pregnant pause, enough to allow the other person to jump in and say something.
it's important. And when we have guests, maybe at first we were both yelling our own question at the same time, and whichever one was louder, they would answer.
I think we got better at that, though.
Yeah, it's a fine run machine at this point.
Yeah, I think we're getting. I think we're getting better. I think we have kind of this give and take. Sometimes one of us will jump in on a follow-up question before the other has a chance to pose their question. But I think in general we do kind of like a, you know, first me, then you, or vice versa.
There's a feature on Zoom where you can raise your hand. That would
Really?
yeah. I'm not going to look at it right now and figure out and try to teach it to you because I don't know where it is myself, but I've seen it where you just raise your hand, and I mean that
Can't you
could
just raise your hand?
I guess you could, but then the guests would see that and it would look weird. Uh,
Oh,
um,
they're fine. They're going to be okay.
okay, well, we're talking about guests, but we're not having anybody. It's just the two of us talking about something today, so we don't need to raise our hands.
No, not really. Um, I wanted to start out though. Do you know what cop show most cops consider to be the most, I don't know if authentic is the right word, or more realistic?
Yeah.
Any
Well,
idea?
first to go back to Hill Street Blues. That's from the back in the day. Uh,
Hmm.
and then more recent ones, probably something that's not on network television. So I would go, I mean, I really like The Wire. I think it's an accurate description of Baltimore.
There we go. You're an ass.
Do you have a different opinion on all of this?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily have come up with this show because this show predates everything you just said. But one of the things that often gets talked about is that most of police work is not necessarily chasing down hoodlums through alleyways, but it's actually the paperwork and kind of the interpersonal play that happens between people within the squad room. And for that reason, one of the shows that most cops talk about is Barney Miller.
I was thinking about that when you said it, because they don't really go out on many calls. They're just interviewing people and drinking coffee and a lot of chatter, but it's funny as hell.
Well, it's one of those things where, so when I watched it, I was not, I mean, I liked it, and I love, I think most people remember the bass line that starts out the theme song to Barney Miller. But I think one of the things I liked about it was that kind of interplay. There's some pretty goofy characters in it. And even before I really knew why I liked him, I was often drawn to Arthur P. Dietrich.
I was thinking the same guy. What the heck? I am Dietrich.
Where I remember one time on the show, someone asked him what's the P stand for. He said, I was never informed.
Yeah,
But
well,
I just,
it was great. He was deadpan.
he was deadpan. He was also this rather somebody who seemed to exist above the fray and and kind of the chaos and the various characters that existed on that show. He seemed to kind of levitate above them. And I don't know. I found him compelling in much the same way as I found um, the two old guys on the Muppets appealing. I think there's
Weird,
and
weird comparison. Dietrich to the Muppets.
not all the Muppets, just the two old guys. There's kind of like this where they were literally above everybody else and just making pithy little comments. And I kind of always saw Dietrich as that way. And so I don't know. It's one of those shows that I miss, and um, unfortunately, most of the cast is no longer with us, although a lot more than maybe you would think. But it's just one of those shows I really enjoyed, and my father enjoyed it, so I think it's one of the reasons why I watched it was because he was watching it, and so it turned out to be like father son time. That and kung fu films and John Wayne films.
Well, you just dated yourself and actually thereby both of us for the listener or listeners who are out there who have no idea what the heck we're talking about.
I think we have a much more savvy, wise, old soul listeners.
Okay, I hope so. Those people around the globe may wonder, but they'll probably look it up and start watching it, and it'll catch on.
And then pretty soon it'll sweep their country.
I sure hope so. But it was part of a
The one guy in the Ukraine, but
yeah. I mean, there was a lineup. I don't know if it was Thursday night. It seems like it was, but there were a few shows that you watched, on either side of Barney Miller. It was one of the great things about network television back then. You actually could occasionally watch comedies that are pretty darn good, and then at 10 o'clock there would be some drama follow.
well, usually that's when I went to bed, and no reason to stay up past 10. But
Okay, so that's why you don't know about Hill Street Blues. It was past your bedtime.
I knew about him. I just didn't watch him.
Okay, they spent a lot of time in the station also, but then they were in the streets.
Yeah, and I think that I don't know why it is, but it just struck me as strange that that's what a lot of cops talk about because teachers talk about how the fact that they hate teacher shows. Shows about teachers, shows that take place in schools. They're never good. They're certainly not realistic or accurate. And perhaps cops fall into a similar category.
Yeah, that would be fun to look at teacher type shows, but I think it's underwhelming. Um,
Teacher shows, teacher movies.
yeah,
Teacher movies are the worst. I mean, oh man, you just die 1,000 deaths watching some of this stuff.
sorry to hear that, brother. Um, you had now that pregnant pause was you just kind of thinking and feeling depressed.
Well, the topic of today is kind of like teacher adjacent, as it were, because my current job, if you want to call it that, besides yapping with you every week here on this Zoom, is tutoring.
Gesundheit. What did you say?
Tutoring.
Tutoring.
You did tutoring, didn't you?
Um, I think I need tutoring, but I don't know. I think over the years, it depends on how you define tutoring. What do you consider tutoring?
Well, I think for the purposes of our discussion, we're talking about something that exists outside the classroom. I mean, for us, our tutoring was both in the class and before class and after class. And so it was kind of the filler of the bread of the classroom. It's like so you had the proper lessons and then you had tutorials and then you had a second proper lesson, then you had tutorials and where you were basically trying to rehash, envision, reconstruct the basis of what it is you wanted to say.
Okay.
And
Well,
so,
well, let's start there, and then we'll go to the outside tutoring because I think
gotcha.
you get a little foundation. So, what about in the classroom, essentially tutoring your own students?
It is interesting in that I think for social studies, and in particular history, I think there is this thought among some students that they don't need tutoring in history. They just need to know the story. And I would say yes to a degree. I mean, this is not rocket science. I mean, so, if a kid decides to focus their tutorial energies on math or science, I could certainly get that because that's certainly where I would need it. But I think the first hurdle I had to overcome was to convince kids to come to tutorials. And that was not always a successful endeavor because, again, they were kind of gripped by this idea that history was always the easy subject. And so, therefore, they shouldn't have to need tutorials for history. But inevitably, some did.
Well, some districts, even big charter organizations I know of, had something called mandatory tutorials, and it was based on how are you doing in the class, but more specifically on some type of formative assessment, maybe a benchmark test or something like NWA map. But based on those scores, a certain number of students are um, not just asked to choose, but actually forced and required to. So mandatory tutoring, tutorials was data driven. And if you're below the cut point, you're assigned.
I think like anything that is data driven, there is plenty of room for error. And so, what data might present as a problem may or may not be a real problem. Like, I guess it just depends on the kid. Um, your subject, or at least one of your subjects, you had many, jack of all trades, ace at none,
What?
some would say.
Wait, what?
But but your subject, one of your subjects, German, I would think would lend itself to a lot of people desperately seeking additional help.
Well, I think that teachers were required to schedule them a certain amount of times, but pretty much it was a time for me to correct papers and decide what my tennis lineup was going to be on the next math. So I didn't have a full house for tutorials. I had to ask. I mean, I remember putting it on the board, Thursdays between 3:30 and 3:45 or something. I kept it possible. And no, it would fill up a little bit before a test, or then you would get some people in there. But
What do you think of the idea though of the mandatory tutorials? Because it seems to me that that can be problematic. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
well, it's hard because the parents have to buy in. You have to enforce it, and
Right.
I do know something about you talk about data driven. I feel that was a shot across the bow, but here's some data to significantly improve your score on a state test,
Okay.
on a benchmark assessment. You get tutorials. You need 40 hours of contact time. That's supplemental in that area, in that subject, to have a significant difference in your test score. So
Mhm.
you need a lot of tutoring. So typically with mandatory tutorials, they're not going to, and I'm talking about, over months, not just at one sitting, of course, but over time, you need that much to make a
Right.
difference. So typically with mandatory or not mandatory tutorials, there's not enough time, and they could spread it out over multiple subjects. So it takes a lot to move a needle on achievement. And I think tutorials are very helpful. Um, but the question is that the best use of time, particularly if it's after school or before school? I was not an advocate for it because I knew that no one was really getting enough time to make dramatic difference. But people will, will give stories of, well, this actually helped the student at a crucial point, and that point at that point, they get a little momentum and they build their confidence. So I think there are benefits, but in some ways, if you make it systematic, mandatory, you're probably not going to get the great results that you thought of.
I think the other issue, though, is what is the motivating factor behind the data? And you said it yourself that sometimes it is the byproduct of testing or benchmark testing
Mhm.
or things of that nature. And we have talked plenty on this podcast that that's a erroneous way of looking at achievement is how well or how poorly someone does on a test. And the tutorials that tend to come from test scores, and not so much talking about in-class tests, but rather more standardized tests and more district-based or what have you, that they're responding to the wrong thing, and then they're responding to this very highly selective, crafted set of knowledge that is studied in isolation. And so therefore, the kid has, at least from a historical standpoint, I don't know what it looks like from like a German standpoint or a math standpoint, but the way that it's structured only guarantees that someone can spit out trivia. It doesn't really suggest that a person is going to get away with understanding something on a deeper level.
Well, it's a big ask for teachers, to spend a certain amount of time, and a lot of schools do it. Um, I think that everything needs to be scalable, and if you're working with one student, yes, you can help them. That's the perfect teacher-student ratio for
Right.
learning. But the idea of a review session, that's something that you do before AP tests, for example, and it can be really, really effective. Um, but maybe it's something that students can choose to do, but you get a group, and like before you're having even a unit test, you're going to offer this, and then it allows the students who are maybe concerned about their grade to get a little bit more confidence. So the review session seems more scalable in a way. It's not that I'm recommending no teachers tutor, because it can be very helpful. But if it's going to be something that's imposed upon a teacher, I think the review session makes more sense. What if you have, 10 students show up for the tutorials and they all have different issues?
Yeah.
You're just jumping around. So the review session would probably be a part of it, individual tutorials, as needed. But we're talking about extending the teacher's day in a way, to do tutorials. And is that the best use of that time overall?
I think I think you hit the nail on the head as far as some of the issues with it. I think another issue, and this is not to say that tutorials are not impactful or
Mhm.
helpful, because as you pointed out, there are ways that tutorials can be beneficial. But I think one of the issues that also can sometimes cloud any possible achievement is what the student expects from tutorials.
Right.
When I would have pre-test review sessions like before or after school, like we would do a test like on a Friday and then like or Thursday, and then I would have like a Tuesday afternoon, Wednesday morning review session.
Mhm.
And my review session was merely bringing up some of the major concepts. And I'd make it clear to the kiddos, this does not constitute anything and everything that might be on the test, but here are some major concepts and things for you to think about. And when I would have a student come in individually for tutorials, they would sit there almost in like a passive stance, as if they were waiting for me to wash over them the wonders of historical knowledge. And I would always start the tutorials like with what's your question? What is it that you do not understand? And he said, and somehow a kid would say everything. I said, well, I can't help you that. I mean, it took us 2 weeks to get here. I mean, we got 20 minutes to get this done. I said, this is not helpful. You need to come having understood something. It seems impossible that somebody who understands the Queen's English can't understand at least 50% of something. And then the question is about, trying to understand or trying to maybe re-explain or reframe one particular historical concept or another. And so I think part of what makes tutoring potentially problematic is what the kid understands about it or what they don't understand about
Well, there's probably a intermediary step, which is more like small group instruction,
it.
and potentially, if it's scheduled, where here I'm going to be offering tutoring on this specific concept, and then you get a small group that's all doing one thing. Once again, that's more scalable. But from what I was saying earlier about the 40 hours, it's very, very difficult, unless you go outside of the classroom. And I think that's where you were headed, initially, is talk about supplemental tutoring, that people pay for, that's not with the teachers of that school.
And this I have had a kind of a more out of a question of necessity, but I've developed a kind of a different sense of this. I think as a teacher, I never understood somebody who went outside the class and even went outside the school to pay for it. I said, you got free tutorial help here. Now, how good that tutorial help can be, again, that's a question of a couple of different dynamics. But the idea behind going outside the school framework is that you also get a chance to go deeper and have more of that perfect one-to-one conversation that's not always possible with the teacher at the end of the day. And yes, you have to pay for it. Yes, you have to, you may have to go to a different location, you may have to do it online, but at least there is that opportunity where you have a chance at one-on-one conversation, and ideally you get more out of that.
So that type of tutoring would be structured to get in a substantial number of hours, and
Mm.
since you have an expert in that field, they're not probably going to tutor you on every subject, but you would engage somebody to help you out with one subject specifically of need. And advanced placement seems to lend itself to that, because there's a high stakes test that could result in free college tuition for that course.
Mm. It's quite something, and we've talked about this before, but I think, and so I'm doing tutorials now outside of the school environment, obviously, since I don't teach any longer. And so I have, strangely enough, I have an ESL student, and that's a whole different can of worms altogether. But I also have a history student, and a government student. And so the government student, some of these are classes that I haven't touched on in a while. Thankfully, I'm just naturally brilliant at these sort of things, and so
Here,
it doesn't
Miller,
take me.
you can say that, and people would agree with you, but it's beneath you to digging at this point.
But I think, but the idea, the one-on-one thing, is just that oftentimes I get approached by either the kid or the parent of the kid saying, and it's so shocking how similar it is to being a teacher. My kid never had trouble with history before. And, I'm just sitting there just myself, hell, and it's like it, they come across almost as if they can't believe they're having to do this, you know, and, I've tutored students for shocking amounts of money.
What do you mean? A lot? They
Well,
pay
just
you a lot?
a lot. Yeah, a lot. Yeah. And so I'm always a little surprised that someone would spend a ton of money tutoring on history when history can be a subject that's self-regulating to an extent, but there's always that kind of almost sheepish, "Oh, I can't believe this kid, he's just not getting it. The grades, it's not there. He needs a tutor." And then the tutoring then commences. And so I think that there is some similarities between tutoring a kid outside of school as opposed to inside of school. I think you have some of the similar dynamics to getting to that point where you are asking for tutoring. Um, I kind of lost track of the question, but
Oh, I can't remember it either. But there's a clear value proposition. Imagine you're
sure.
your your student, I'm talking to a parent now, is maybe going to Rice or Baylor or some expensive school, and those 3 hours of credits are really a lot, and so they're not going to have to take that class or pay for it, a couple years later in college. So whatever they pay you is not that much compared to what they're going to get in return.
Well, sure, relatively speaking, and I have tutored college kids before. Most of what I'm doing now are high school kids, but yeah, I mean, if you're looking at tutorials for somebody who's going to Rice or TCU or you know some other highfalutin college, yeah, I mean, there's a big difference between paying 10,000, not 10,000, 5,000 for 3 credits or something like that, as opposed to paying $100 a pop for tutorials. The scale of economies there, kind of wash out. But from someone from my point of view, it just seems like a lot. But I mean, it is an element that it's an interesting element that your entire career as a teacher, you take tutorials almost as a given that it's something that you should offer. And now you're in a world where you're getting money for it, and it's a monetized activity, and it's just strange to look at it. There's just a different mindset that goes into
Well, it seems like we need to work with you on your sales pitch because you're
it.
sort of underselling, what you're offering here. Get this tutoring, and you're going to move from a 3 to a 5. No more happy twos. Um,
I don't do that anymore than you always see like on the cop shows when the cops say never promise the victim anything, because you just don't know. I don't know because there's a lot of externalities that I have no control over as to whether a kid gets a 5 or what have you. It's interesting that people will advertise it. I want my kid to get a 5. Good luck to you. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. It's not just me talking to the kid once or twice a week. I mean, it certainly will help, but I mean, the kids got to do something too. I mean, kids have to have time to do stuff. I was constantly confronted with students when I was a teacher that were making business decisions every day about what to focus on, what not to focus on, and they just did the law of averages and went to math tutorials. So, it's there's so many extra things. It seems problematic to sit there and make an advertisement and say, I guarantee your kid will make a 5 if you take my class.
well,
I don't know that. I mean, so and
it's
neither does the kid, neither does any other tutor.
it's antithetical to our philosophy of education, first of all.
But there's that.
That we would be helping them learn a love of history so that they're going to be reading history on their own and read beyond the course. And there's something transactional about being paid to help a student, and the parents are more likely than not interested in that score, or they pass the class or whatever it is, rather than the love of learning, because the money's involved. Um, so that changes things, which is unfortunate, but probably working with you over time, they're going to get both.
I assume that anybody who tutors with me over a course of time will improve. How much they improve depends on how much they're willing to put into it, but they will improve. I think when you get into money, I think there's an expectation, especially from the parental side of things. This is what I'm paying for, and I just like, it's a, I just don't even know what to do with that argument. I'm paying this money. This kid should make a 5. I said, well, my grandmother had wheels, she'd be a wagon. So what do you what do you want from me? So I can do my part, but there's a couple of different parts that have to play themselves out, and so it's not solely under my control. And so, but I think when people have money invested, I think sometimes the demands can be sometimes unreasonable. You've had to do this though, where you have worked as maybe tutor is not the right word, but more like a mentor, where you're trying to usher people along towards completing dissertations and doctoral studies or what have you. I mean, how do you approach that when you do something along those lines?
Well, I have a little more of a confidence in the outcome because I've done it about 300 times. And so when I get on a preliminary call with somebody, I thank them for and congratulate them for reaching out, and I ask them when they're going to be a doctor, and then they think about it and say, well, maybe May of 2025. And I say, well, I'm your insurance policy because between now and then, if we work backwards, there are certain steps, certain um, um, gatekeeper type things that you need, gates that you need to go through, benchmarks. But you will pass because everybody that I work with um, graduates. They end up
Mm,
being a doctor once they get to a certain step. And it's usually when
right.
they have data in their hand, then it's 100%. And so I tell them that and that we need to get to that step. And here's where we are. And then you're going to be home free because you have support. And I'm not taking the part of a dissertation chair. They are still driving the project. So it's this delicate balance, but a dissertation chair can't provide weekly feedback and have 45-minute conversations with each of their candidates. That would never happen. So it's giving them a lot of extra time, but it very much is a system that always works. And that's, so I'm very confident that the outcome is going to be a doctorate. So
But that's assuming that the student, that the doctoral student is at a certain point. For example, you would not necessarily take on a student that was beginning a doctoral program.
Oh, not so. And that's the best time.
Yeah.
Then they're even more likely to get the win because I can help them frame their study. And I make
Okay.
sure they do a study that they can execute and they have access to the data. And it'll be, not overreaching, but something that they can complete in a timely fashion. So whenever it is, I've even worked with students pre-dissertation, they're still taking courses and they want
Right.
support throughout the whole program. But it always works because you're providing something um, that has been tested and you're giving them so much.
Mhm.
It's relatively expensive. It's $100 a week throughout until they're done with me. And so we basically pay monthly, but the system provides what they can't get, and most of the students who come to me, I mean, just want a sounding board and to write a great dissertation, but a lot of them have been struggling and they've lost that momentum. And so I tell them right away, you need a win. You need to re-engage with your chair. You need to submit a chapter one and get them to approve it, and then you move on. So that's kind of the way I work, but it is in a way individual teaching because when we get to the statistics, they probably didn't get as much application of that in their coursework. And so I'm teaching them one-on-one how to do statistics using their paper as a teaching tool. And the same thing about qualitative analysis. So it is a lot of tutoring, but it's not preparing them for a test. It's preparing them to be able to execute this writing project that has a beginning, middle, and definitely an end.
I don't know how to explain the difference, and I don't think I suffer from a lack of confidence. I mean, I think you're dealing with a more of a binary approach. The person will get their doctorate or
Mhm.
they won't.
Right.
And that, for me, that's not the issue. The issue is how well they pass or how well they're successful. And that's where, I can probably get a kid to the point of passing, especially if tutorials, but if the moms or dad is paying a lot of money, they're going to ensure that the kid's putting in their fair share, but at the very least pass. Whether that means they pass with a 4 or 5, who knows? I don't know. But it's it I don't know. I've always considered it more of a open proposition that, because I think with tutoring, it does take both people highly engaged, fully engaged.
Right.
Now, a doctoral candidate is ideally perhaps more mature, more driven, more open to suggestion. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I've always been reluctant to say, yes, your kid will definitely get a 5.
Yeah. No, you need to know where they start.
Yeah.
But there's individual tutoring for SAT, for
Yeah.
example. or ACT, and so a big part of that tutoring is not content, but it's teaching them the test,
It's
and that's
strategy. Yeah,
yeah, which is something that you know really really well as being an AP history teacher. You can do that very easily, and I'm sure that would be, I mean, that's a way to at least give them the best chance of passing. So you're giving them
mm,
all this content, but mixing in, practice tests and different things that you've learned over the years to maximize. But you're right, that's all you can do. They have to put it in, put the time in.
yeah. And I have, I've always had, even before I knew how to kind of explain why I did it. I always had difficulty framing everything solely based on how you take the test. I would use it as a backdrop, okay, here, okay, we're going to talk about writing today, and it was more about how do you write well historically, as opposed to how do you write well for the purposes of the AP exam. Now, it works hand in hand, but for me, my emphasis was always on the skill, not necessarily how it applies to the test, so, uh, for example, there is an aspect of the AP US history essay, um, and it's the last point that a student can earn on the essay. And I didn't come up with this term, somebody else did, but I used it. And I would always say that that point was the unicorn point. And the reason why it was called the unicorn point is that that last point is purposefully vague and not defined, but speaks to a more complex, sophisticated, complete writing on a particular topic. And for me, if you do everything well, and if you explain everything the way you're supposed to explain it, that last point still is not guaranteed because that last point is more about stylistic. It's more the function of a kid who just really knows how to write well. And so you could sit there and say, you know, you know, that this point is obtainable, but it makes no sense to teach it because you will either get to that point or you won't get to that point. All the other things, all the other 6 points or 5 points with a FRQ, um, that you can teach. That you can kind of say, okay, here's a strategy, here's a technique, this is what they're looking for, what have you. I always enjoyed the fact that this last point just kind of was hanging out there. And so, so for me, the idea of teaching the test specifically with tutorials, I just never did it. And I don't know, I still think I served my students well, but I was more interested in just teaching them history and teaching them how to think historically with the idea that if they know how to do that, they're going to do fine on the test. And so you don't specifically have to talk about the test.
So you're taking a more balanced approach with your tutorial students. At this point, you're not a mercenary going in and prepping them to master the exam elements, that you're focusing on the content.
It's a bigger picture. Now, the other student that I have at present, and they are an exchange student, and they're having a lot of challenges with regards to English, and it's because they learned English the way a lot of people here in the United States learn French. It's like the Father Guido Sarducci 5-minute language course. This is hola, ¿cómo estás? Una cerveza, por favor. So because of that, they don't have a very good grounding. You and I have talked about the idea of how language is taught and how it should be taught, when it should be taught, all this other stuff. And unfortunately, this kid's class growing up has been the worst elements of how you might see it in the United States, where it's just all grammar, it's all memorization, it's all vocabulary lists, and there's very little discussion, there's very little conversation. And so, unfortunately, now they find themselves in a foreign land not have. I mean, they're getting better. I mean, you're going to get better if you're surrounded by it. You're going to improve, whether they're able to improve enough to be able to stay in the country, because that's one of the catches with a lot of exchange programs. If you don't cut the mustard academically, then you get sent home. And so with this student, there's a lot of urgency to it. And so it's a very different sort of thing than if I'm tutoring someone for the AP government exam or AP US history exam or whatever AP exam.
Well, that's showing a lot of range. I mean, the idea of teaching is teaching at some level, so you can be
Mm,
successful imparting knowledge in any area. Um,
mm,
but academic language, I think you're right. That's a whole different ball game. I mean, you can do social niceties all you want, but you need to have a reading knowledge, a knowledge of context, and what surrounds the words. Academic language often, I mean, the word on the street, in the ESL business is it takes 7 years to develop academic language to get to grade level.
right.
And so you're trying to do that in a few months. Very challenging, but hopefully there's the immersion of being here and being in classes and not hearing English at home,
Right.
combined with working with you, they could be successful.
I certainly hope so. This is, English as a second language is not my bailiwick. That's not what I specialized in, but I have a lot of experience in learning language. And so that's where I was asked to contribute, and I said I would. But yeah, I mean, it's a number crunch kind of a thing, and it's something that I'm not accustomed to, but it makes for a very different experience.
So are you doing this independently? Are you working through platforms? Do you have a website? How are you, getting this information to people?
So the tutorials I do through a couple different platforms,
Hmm.
education platforms, tutorial platforms. Um, the exchange student is one I know personally, and so therefore it's kind of more of a one-on-one
Right.
type of thing. So it's like an off the books, as it were. But the other ones are through um, tutorial platforms, and so it's um, it's kind of a weird setup because you're reaching out to people who have reached out to the void, asking for help in this subject or that subject. That's like the first step, and then if they pick you, then the arrangement starts from there. And so it's a bit of hustle that, as a teacher, that's not anything I've ever had to deal with. The kids came into the classroom every year. You didn't have to sit there and like some sort of panhandler just ask for students. Now you're in a position where, or at least I'm in a position where, I'm appealing to students saying, hey, come over here, take a look at this. This is what I can do. This is what I've done, that sort of thing. And so it's a selling of yourself that I'm not accustomed to as a teacher. But been an interesting process, at least here in the beginning.
Well, we can work on the business aspect of it. In every way, people would be really lucky to work with you, and you need to believe that before you can sell it. But I've known you for a long time, and you're one of the finest teachers that I've ever encountered, and so these students are incredibly lucky if they're working with you.
Well, first of all, thank you. I certainly have the confidence to do it. It's just,
Mhm.
it's just a new realm. It's a little like the first time when I tried to network.
Mhm.
And, there's nothing in my being, there's nothing in my professional being that ever prepared me to network. I find it at a very basic level, I find it manipulative to sit there and utilize a friendship to try to get something out of it. And so I know that no one thinks of it that way, especially people who are accustomed to networking. No one thinks about it that way. It's just one of those things. It's one of those new skills that I had to learn, and I'm still learning, about how to do things from kind of a business perspective.
Well, I think in time, because this type of thing does snowball and you get referrals and all of that. So I think in the long run, you just keep doing what you're doing, but being always mindful that those students are going to benefit. And so it makes you much more willing to network and because if you don't tell people what you're doing, and I think doing this podcast is helpful, no one will know, and no
Right.
kids will be helped. So I'd like to see how this goes in a year, but I imagine it's just gonna there's a lot of referral things, and you're gonna be on a couple of different sites, but um, you'll either love it or not love it. But I have a feeling that you'll be good at it.
Here's the thing that has struck me is and that is it is the best of what a teacher is without being a teacher.
Hmm.
Because there's a lot of bullshit that goes along with, being a teacher. There's a lot of rigmarole that you have to deal with. There's a lot, or there's just a lot.
Right.
And so I remember the first time I tutored this one kid in AP government, and I'm sitting there going over the stuff, and it wasn't that I was jonesing to be a teacher again, but at the same time, it felt cool to do it again, and it was fun for me to do it. You just don't have to deal with all that other mess that typically goes with being a teacher. And so it's like taking the best out of the profession and still being outside the profession, but being able to still do some of the stuff.
Sounds fun the way you present it. Um, and you don't miss managing a classroom and all that good
No.
stuff and all the bells and noise and social drama happening around you, all the things that we've talked about. You don't need that anymore.
I certainly don't. And that's why I'm fine being retired. I think it's a transition when you retire as you sit there and you try to find your own way to do something else because you can't just sit there and watch YouTube. You got to be doing something productive. Uh, but uh, but it is certainly it's an adjustment. But I'm having fun, so
Well,
we'll see how it goes.
yeah. I mean, if you're a teacher, you're a teacher. It doesn't matter what you're
Sure.
doing. You're always teaching. Uh, well, interesting topic here, Miller. We weren't sure where we were going to go with this today, and I like the tutoring idea. Um,
I think it works. I think it
yeah,
did all right.
yeah, yeah. We're getting there.
I think people will like it even if there isn't a guest here. Occasionally, we'll
Yeah,
still find ways of being intriguing and compelling.
I guess so. We don't get the boost of them sharing it with their network, but anybody who is listening could, you know, share our link with their network, and who knows, at that point.
And this is a shameless plug. Share the link,
Share
people.
the book. Yeah, yeah, find
Yeah,
one person, and they'll find one person.
yeah.
We have a pyramid scheme just waiting to happen.
And it doesn't have to be this episode, although we both agreed here at the end that we like this episode. But I mean, if you've been listening to us for a while or even for a little bit, you may have a favorite episode. Send that out to people. Send that out. Let people know what's going on, what's happening. And then, like I said, who knows?
Yeah, I listen to our episode on motivational theory like once a week. Just keep coming back to it, and people are saying that they listen to our travels through Europe all the time just because they need a laugh.
Certainly a lot to laugh at, but yeah.
Yeah,
So between you white knuckling it, just there on the side and commenting through gritted teeth, it's yeah, it's always fun to do.
I think so.
All right, well, it's time to get to football.
Yeah,
Football to watch, football to consume.
yep.
I'm
Somebody's got
told that
to,
there are good football teams out there. They're
yeah, somebody's got to watch all those games. So,
gonna watch themselves, So,
yeah.
all right. Well, with that, we shall say adieu, Herr Doctor Bourgeois.
Auf Wiedersehen, Herr Miller.